Now, so far in the literature review, we covered two characteristics under taxonomy reviews, they are the two are focus and goal. And I said you choose only one of them for this particular feature, so that you can actually then move on to what's called perspective. And in perspective, there are two perspectives that you can actually follow. The first one is relating to being neutral, where you are presenting the review findings as facts, done both in primary and secondary research. They are all are facts. And now here, in this kind of approach, you are talking about quantitative research, whereas the other type is posal, where you are talking about revealing pre-existing biases, and that was qualitative research, where you are looking into the quality of the work without having to compare and do lots of data analysis and percentages and so on, and analyzing percentages, which is the quantitative research usually. Now, in terms of, so you can choose one of these two, either quantitative or qualitative, or you can have a mix. Now, in terms of coverage, students ask me usually, how many articles do we need to cover in order to get a paper done? Of course, coverages are four. One of them is exhaustive review, which means you include every available piece of research on a certain topic which is published or unpublished, and that is called exhaustive review, which means including published and unpublished papers or print or publications. The second one is exhaustive one with selective citation, which means you only include published articles and no conference papers. That is the second type of coverage. Third type, of course you can choose one of them, as I said before, is representative sampling in the coverage. In other words, no random sampling, and must be very representative by using evidence to that. In other words, you are sampling representatively from each area. Or you can use the last one is called purposive sampling, which means you have a purpose behind the sampling, and that is perhaps you are focusing or examining the pivotal or central articles in the field, and therefore you are using only these samples that are for a certain purpose. You can choose one of these coverages, not all of them are required. So if you choose the purposive sampling, you choose the topic or the central articles only, and you are summarizing them. If you are talking about representative sampling, then you are there's no random sampling, and it must be representative of each area in your or each part or point in your area. We'll move on to the next one, which is organization. Now, some students ask me this question and say, how do we organize our literature review? On what basis? And on what format? There are three types of formats which are related to organizing your literature review. The first one is historical format, and the other the historical format, then the conceptual format, and then the methodological format. In the historical one, you review and you organize it chronologically, used for emphasis on the progress of the research methods or theories or changes in practices over time. In other words, you are moving from in 2010, in 2011, in 2012, blah, 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 in 2013, blah, 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 and 14, blah, blah, blah. So you are actually following it chronologically, whether it's you are talking about the theories or the research methods or the practices over a period of time. In the conceptual format, you are organizing them according to the concepts, around the concepts themselves, okay, according to the various theories in the literature. Or you can organize them according to the traditional methodological form, which is like in an empirical paper, where you are organizing them as introduction, method, results, and discussion, and that is really what you need to do. You need to note that historical and conceptual formats overlap when doing meta-analysis reports. The next one, and the last one really, it's actually the audience, and in this one you have three types of audience. The first one is the primary audience, which is your supervisor and reviewers of the research paper. And then you've got secondary audience, which is the scholars in the field, if you're publishing it in a scholarly journal, or general non-academic audience, which means you are publishing it in a newspaper, and the general public are involved, not necessarily academics. So that's what we have covered so far. And as you can see, the primary research, there's a difference between primary research and secondary research. Primary research means that you are actually getting other people's research, summarizing them. Whereas primary research is your research, where you are formulating a problem, collecting data, evaluating the data, analyzing it and interpreting it, understanding it, and then presenting it to the public. And that's what you are doing. There is a very important element of inclusion and exclusion, and you need to put an explicit criterion or criteria, explicit criteria to know what to include and not exclude of the articles you want to put in. For example, you might put the dates. I would start in my criteria, for example, with the dates. I mean, that is one of the things. You can say, I want to start from 2010. And any articles before 2010, I'm not going to include them. Or you want to include only, for example, about certain theory and no other theory. Or you want to include only the papers that are written in English, for example, and not in French and German and Spanish and Arabic and so on. Or you want to include only articles in Arabic and English and not any other. So you have to put forward an explicit list or explicit criteria for your own inclusion and exclusion, of course. So you can put dates, and you can put language, perhaps, as a parameter for that one as well, for the articles that you need to do to include and exclude from your own research. So this is really what needs to be happening here. Now there are general errors that are happening usually. For example, some of the errors that are made when reviewing literature review is that not clearly relating the findings. For example, the review is nothing to do with your own study, or not identifying the best resources or sources to use in the review, or you're relying on secondary sources rather than primary sources. And here what is meant by secondary sources, not primary sources, the secondary sources is when you are reading a book, let's say, and in the book they've quoted some other scholar before. That quotation, if you are using it, you are using secondary source. In other words, you are not reading the original quotation in its original book. You are reading it in another book, recent one, where it is cited. You need to go to the original, to the primary source, and not to rely on a secondary source, just in case they might have quoted something incorrectly. So you need to use primary sources. Uncritically accepts another findings. In other words, you just copy them and paste these findings from another researcher, and you can accept them to be valid, and you don't discuss them or examine them critically. You're not reporting about research methods and procedures that you have done and used in your literature review. Or you are reporting isolated statistic research or results rather than synthetically or synthesizing them as well. Or not considering contrary findings to the ones that you have actually found. My summary of the literature review in total is, first, you collect, because it's derailing your literature review, so you have to collect the data. Then you analyze the data, then you synthesize the data, and finally you assess and evaluate the data. And of course, in the analysis, you can focus on three elements, which is research outcome, research methods, theories or practices. You choose one. In the goal, you choose whether you are integrating the findings, analyzing them, analyzing previous research critically, identifying central issues, or explicating an argument. In the perspective or the angle, you are either going for qualitative research or quantitative research. And then you have the coverage. Which coverage are you talking about? Including everything, exclusive, extensive research, a review, which means including what's printed and unprinted, or exhaustive, which is just the printed, or representative sampling, when you have to sample from each area, each one point. Or you can go for purposive sampling, where you are focusing on a certain pivotal central point or topic. Then in the type of audience, there are three types. In the organization, you go for the historical organization of your literature review format, or conceptual, you're focusing on the concepts and you're organizing the concepts, maybe alphabetically. And then you move on the methodological format, which is introduction, conclusion, and findings as well. And finally, the audience, you know who your audience are, whether they are your supervisor or academics in a journal, so you need to know globally, or it is non-academic audience, as in newspaper, and then you are on the right track. I think I have covered quite a lot. I mean, here is I'm going to give you an example, really, which shows an application of this, and you can see if this in this application, you see in the first abstract it says what were previously considered. In other words, he's looking at what's been published before, and he's found out that the little is known about the impact, so he's found out very little that's been discussed. And we are presenting a literature review, and we are examining, and the results suggests you need to not only discuss the methodology issues, but you need to explain what these results are, and you are looking at that. And also when you are saying in this paper, you find further research is needed in certain area based on your literature review. Furthermore, if you look at the background, you see when you read reports, you need to show what the report is talking about. 80% is blah, blah, blah. And then you say considerable research, literature review exists on this matter. Researchers are now beginning to examine. You see, this is where you start to examine new things. And when you conduct, you present existing evidence, which is what are the previous reports. And of course, the aim is to provide accurate and relevant information on the issue and determine what further research is needed. Okay, that is really basically what you are doing here. In the method, you say, we performed a literature search. They looked at certain databases and they searched for these keywords, okay, diabetes, chronic illness, and they found how many articles? They found 8,966. There were duplicates in there. They need to remove these duplicates, and they have to put inclusion criteria, and the inclusion is papers in English or French. And they start from, when they are assessing, they are starting from 1990 onwards. That's where the limits is. And they are covering certain topic, and they're measuring certain element in their criteria inclusion when they found. And then after the criteria done, they've realized there's only 43 articles that are done and are relevant, and they can use them in their literature review. So in the conclusion, they would say the literature review has not kept pace with evidence. It has been known for some time, and now it has been well documented that, and of course that will continue to increase globally, and you are trying to actually tell what other further researchers have to be doing further. So in actual fact, the literature review in total is just summarizing what has been done before, and you are reading really well, and you are telling the readers which articles you've included, why you included them, because of the Criteria of inclusion includes from which date and in which languages that you've used and all that, so that you can then see what are the duplicates, because when you search in various databases you might find duplicates of the same articles being published here and there, being mentioned here and there. So you need to actually eliminate the duplicates as well. I hope that actually everybody has actually got a very brief idea of what a literature review is, and as I said, well, to summarize it, it's what's been done. You are trying to establish what has been done before you start, and to find out what needs to be done. Thank you very much.